order to do that, obviously you have to have governmental power. Without that, it's difficult to set up these alternative channels. But one just has to persist. In the world we live in today is very volatile. I mean, it's not advertised so much, but there are 5 European countries on the verge of a huge economic collapse. The mainstream economists in the United States are saying that the bailouts haven't worked and that there's going to be a new recession within the next year or two. So the crisis of these countries is going to, create new forms of in spreading information. Maybe some of the old forms will become more amenable. They didn't in Greece, by the way, which is divided now 50-50. The minute a new popular force appeared on the scene in the shape of Syriza, even some of the better Greek newspapers suddenly pulled down the shutters and became voices for propaganda voices for the old corrupt rogues who wrecked that country before. So it varies from country to country, and we don't know how this will happen. But you are part of the process, those of you who are becoming journalists, to help create something new and something different. I know it seems difficult at times, but it can be done. I mean, in the United States, look, we know what the media is like, but you also have, I admit it's very small, but when you have Amy Goodman's show Democracy Now!, which is now watched or heard by 2.5 million people every day, it's not nothing. It's something. And then the links are circulated all over the world. I mean, I often get emails from people in Africa, places who've seen that show in their own time, because it's always on the web. And this is the world we live in, and nothing is going to be handed to us on a plate. It has to be fought for. And that is what we are seeing in parts of Europe now, and certainly in other continents as well.
I'm a student at Asian College of Journalism. I have 2 questions for you. The first one, the Western media has often been accused of romanticizing Indian culture. Although the Delhi gang rape, the uproar over the Delhi gang rape has been well documented by the Western media. So do you think the Western media has finally started looking at India beyond the realm of poverty and Bollywood? And my second question is, following the very first successful democratic election in Pakistan, do you see democracy surviving, living, and ever thriving in your land of birth?
I think there are always outlets and papers and magazines which don't see India purely in terms of Bollywood or disaster stories or murders or rape. I mean, there is serious coverage of India, actually, in quite a lot of the press, both the right-wing press and the liberal press. The tabloids one doesn't take seriously. I mean, they will only cover all that. But by and large, this has been the case for some time. There's not enough of it. In the old days, one could get, both from The Guardian and The Times, some idea of what was happening in India. Now it's not the case. Even The Guardian's foreign coverage tends to be very weak, because one of the things that happened is after the Cold War they withdrew correspondence from many places. And then they thought it was going to be a world without conflict, and now we could concentrate on contemplating our own navels. But it didn't quite work out like that, and suddenly new people had to be sent to South America, to the Arab world, etc., etc. And they were mostly inexperienced in journalism, because the old guard had been got rid of. And that was not such a good thing. But by and large, I would say, The Economist and the Financial Times, not that I agree with them, but they do cover India. And so you get some picture from their point of view of what is happening in India. And then increasingly, I mean, myself and I'm sure many others turn to the Indian press to see what they can find. And here I said it, they are basically, I don't say it because Mr. Ram is on this platform. I've always said it for many years now that the Hindu is the only serious paper left in English. I don't read the vernacular press, unfortunately, whereas once upon a time there used to be several. Frontline and Outlook are the two magazines whose websites you can go to and see what's going on, and that gives me a much better picture than anything published in the British press from that point of view. The second question on Pakistan about democracy. Look, if democracy is being effectively truncated in its heartlands, which it is, where to have a political party coming up which challenges center-left and center-right parties is considered unthinkable, and where each party agrees with the other one on fundamentals, then you have to question. And this is why many young people have stopped voting. In Spain, in Britain too. It'll soon start happening in France. That young people are saying, what's the point of voting if nothing changes? So if this is happening in the heartlands, Pakistan is a sort of very extreme example of that. I mean, what we've seen is one filthy rich gang of politicians replaced by another filthy rich gang of politicians. And the only difference between Zardari, who is still president of Pakistan, and the Sharif brothers, who are the new leaders, the new victors, the only difference could be that whereas Zardari accumulated wealth in the most primitive way imaginable, simply for himself and his family and a few cronies, Nawaz Sharif and his brother Shahbaz might do it for their class as a whole, which will be a move towards something more rational. But, you know, they threaten no one. They'll be allowed to stay there. It's you know, the army which has ruled Pakistan for a long time and wrecked the country. I don't think the Americans want a military coup in Pakistan. Why? They don't need it. So the generals are quite happy staying in the barracks as long as they too can make money, which they do. So you have filthy rich politicians and filthy rich generals. And meanwhile, the bulk of the country suffers. You know, the 60% of the children born in Pakistan, thanks to malnutrition, are born either moderately or severely stunted. In other words, the height of the average Pakistani is going down. No one even talks about that. And the people in the country, the elite, who run that country, just don't care a damn about the poor. They live in a bubble world. And in a bubble world, you know, you live in gated communities, you have people defending you all the time. Poor old President Zardari was so fearful that he used to sleep in a different bedroom each night. And then when his peer told him that you have to move away from the mountains close to the sea, he got the message and shifted to Karachi, which is not a capital city. So, you know, all these things are going on, and there's underneath it's sort of chaos whirling around. And you have jihadi groups carrying out murders ad nauseam, sometimes against foreigners, sometimes against Shia, sometimes against minorities within their own community who don't listen to them. So it is not a good picture, and I'm not optimistic, to put it mildly.
My name is Krishna. I'm a student at ACJ. My question is a continuation regarding democracy. Do you think we've reached, or we will reach in the near future, a tipping point where we could not write off, but maybe label democracy as a failure or rather not a success? And if we were to reach that tipping point, what would be the next step forward, do you think? Given what's happening right now in America and Europe and India and Asia. My second question is regarding the ICC and the ACJ, in light of I-law. Do you think these are actually functional institutions? Or, I mean, to me it would appear that they are like the UNSC or the General Assembly, they're not puppets. Do you think there's any point of time where they will actually do good and people will actually be wary of their jurisdiction and have that influence their actions?
As far as the future of democracy is concerned, at the moment it looks bleak. I have to say this. I mean, not only people of my political persuasion, but many political scientists who are very staunch supporters of the existing system are getting very worried. That if you carry on producing parties, winning elections who do very little that is different from the party that they've replaced, naturally people say, what's the point of voting? Which is why, apart from Obama's first election, where lots of people turned out to vote in a black president for the first time, but 4 million of them didn't turn out the second time because they'd seen that, you know, being black or a woman or white or pink or yellow is not the question. The question is what you actually do when you're in power. So there is a growing worry about what form of democracy will prevail. And increasingly now, I see the Western world, very little thought given to this. The politicians, if you look at the politicians, very few of them have any vision at all. In that, they're not so different from our great subcontinent, but they're mainly visionless, you know, obsessed with, I mean, the noise they appreciate is the thunder of money. And basically, that's all they seem to care about. And this is true in the West as well. You know, these sort of leaders who are hyped up like Tony Blair turns out to be a corrupt moron. You know, accepting money from Kazakhstan to act as a PR spokesman for them. Clinton is exactly the same. All this is going on, and people know about it. And because the people are not responding immediately, the rulers imagine that they're not thinking about it, but they are. It goes deep down into people saying, what have we become? And that will ultimately have an impact. As to what will replace it, who knows? That if the elite has its way, what could replace it actually is a totally moth-eaten and a democracy which exists largely in name but is heavily controlled. I mean, what Der Spiegel calls soft totalitarianism, I mean, it's a strong remark, but that is the case, which, I mean, it's a sort of regime which could happen because no one is challenging them. They don't have to prove anything. They feel they can do what they like unless they're threatened. So we shall see, but you know, it will be one of the tasks, I think, of the left and progressive movements to defend and deepen democracy. Not just say great, because it's not something that belongs to capital. In fact, capital has always resisted it, always attacked the mob, as they called ordinary people, the crowd, the masses. They don't like that, but they were forced to do it, and then they saw they could maintain it. It might not go on all that longer. So I think one of the tasks of the left will have to be to not only increase and deepen democracy, but insert it on every level. What was your second question? The United Nations. Oh, the International Court of Justice. I thought you were asking about the UN Security Council. The same applies to that. That effectively, since we have a unipolar world, the Security Council, by and large, has ceased to be a functioning body, if ever it was. It was created after the Second World War. And it was reflective of the victors of that war. So the victorious powers were all given seats. You know, most of the large countries of the world were ignored, or they were colonized at the time. And so that structure still prevails, and now that structure has become even more bizarre because the United States uses it pretty ruthlessly. Though Bush was very honest when he said, when the Security Council refused to vote for a particular resolution supporting the intervention in Iraq, Bush said, fine, don't worry. He said, you know, our position is if we can use the Security Council, we'll use that. If we can't use that, we'll use NATO. If we can't use NATO, we'll go in ourselves. We are not worried. At least he's honest, and that is the reality. And that is the reality of how they operate. So one shouldn't expect too much from any of these institutions. The International Court of Justice is virtually the same. And the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague only tries so-called war criminals from countries which the United States has defeated. I mean, you know, honestly, under any interpretation of international law, Bush and Blair should be tried at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague as war criminals. I mean, 30% of the British think they are war criminals. But no, because justice is always one-eyed on this level. You know, it never looks at what these I mean, why weren't the United States tried for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki? One of the most horrific acts towards after the defeat of Germany, when there's no threat at all. Horrific what happened. It's something absent from our thought processes even, because we don't think about it. And now the Japanese state wants nuclear weapons. They're constantly pressing the United States, give us nuclear weapons. So these institutions, you know, are in a unipolar world dominated by those who dominate that world. One shouldn't expect anything different. There is no third force in the world today. The South Americans are important, but on their own they are nothing. Yugoslavia has been destroyed. India is supine. Large country like India does nothing on the international front which you know, opposes the great imperial power. They're desperate to be like it, which will never happen. But you know, so Brazil is less supine than India, but still by and large careful in what it does. It will not support any intervention against its neighbors. It has said that. Lula and Dilma both said that. But so it's a world largely dominated by the United States, and that applies to ideology and institutions.